Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're continuing our reading of Flow by Mr. C. I'm going to call him Mr. C because I don't know how to pronounce his name. And this particular book was inspired by an animated film that I saw recently, and I'll put the link to the trailer and the official website in the description box below. You guys can check it out. I don't think it has any association with the book, but it just has the same name. The animated film is called Flow as well. So, well, and today we'll be reading starting chapter 2. And the way we do it is there are certain areas where there's words or phrases that are highlighted. That means that there's a footnote or in the back of the book. So what I'll do is I'll read the paragraph and then we'll read the footnote in the back. Okay. And all right, let's get started here. Chapter 2, The Anatomy of Consciousness. At certain times in history, let me move the camera in a little bit here so you guys can see. If you have a book, you can follow with us. If not, you can follow it with us on the screen here on Zoom. At certain times in history, cultures have taken it for granted that a person wasn't fully human unless he or she learned to master thoughts and feelings. In Confucian China, in ancient Sparta, in Republican Rome, in the early pilgrim settlements of New England, and among the British upper classes of the Victorian era, people were held responsible for keeping a tight rein on their emotions. Anyone who indulged in self-pity, who let instinct rather than reflection dictate actions, forfeited the right to be accepted as a member of the community. In other historical periods, such as the one in which we are now living, the ability to control oneself is not held in high esteem. People who attempt it are thought to be faintly ridiculous, uptight, or not quite with it. But whatever the dictates of fashion, it seems that those who take the trouble to gain mastery over what happens in consciousness do live a happier life. To achieve such mastery, it is obviously important to understand how consciousness works. In the present chapter, we shall keep a step in that direction. To begin with, and just to clear the air of any suspicion that in talking about consciousness, we are referring to some mysterious process, we should recognize that, like every other dimension of human behavior, it is the result of biological processes. It exists only because of the incredibly complex architecture of our nervous system, which in turn is built up according to instructions contained in the protein molecules of our chromosomes. At the same time, we should also recognize that the way in which consciousness works is not entirely controlled by its biological programming. In many important respects that we shall review in the pages that follow, it is self-directed. In other words, consciousness has developed the ability to override its genetic instructions and to set its own independent course of action. And there's a footnote back here about consciousness. Okay. Consciousness. This concept has been central to many religious and philosophical systems, e.g., those of Kant and Hegel. Early psychologists like Ock, 1905, have tried to define it in modern scientific terms with little success. For several decades, behavioral sciences had abandoned the notion of consciousness altogether because self-reports of internal states were held to lack scientific validity. Some recent renewal of interest in the topic can be discerned. Pope and Singer, 1978. Historical summaries of the concept can be found in Boring, 1953, and Klausner, 1965. Smith, in 1969, who coined the term introspective behaviorism, gives a definition which is very close to the one used in this volume. Continuous experience, conscious experience, is an internal event about which one does do directly what one wants to do. Smith, 1969, page 108. Let's read that again. Conscious experience is an internal event, so it's an inside job, about which one does do the action that the person does directly, what one wants to do. So there's a direct correlation between whatever it is that you want to do and the action that you take. It's just a decision, right? Isn't that what it's saying? It's a decisive moment where your desire or your want correlates with your action. That's where the power is. I say that all the time to my clients. That's where your power is. It's in the here and now. It's in your decision. Anyways, sorry. A lot of big words for nothing. Otherwise, however, there is little overlap between the concept as developed here and that of either Smith or any other behaviorally oriented psychologist. The main difference is that my emphasis oh, sorry, I lost my place there. The main difference is that my emphasis is on the subjective dynamics of experience and on its phenomenological primacy. A fuller definition of consciousness will be provided in the later sections of this chapter. Okay, let's see, where are we here? All right. The function of consciousness is to represent information about what is happening outside and inside the organism in such a way that it can be evaluated and acted upon by the body. In this sense, it functions as a clearinghouse for sensations, perceptions, feelings, and ideas, establishing priorities among all the diverse information. Without consciousness, we would still know what is going on, but we would have to react to it in a reflexive, instinctive way. With consciousness, we can deliberately weigh what the senses tell us and respond accordingly. And we can also invent information that did not exist before. It is because we have consciousness that we can daydream, make up lies, and write beautiful poems and scientific theories. Over the endless dark centuries of its evolution, the human nervous system has become so complex that it is now able to affect its own states, making it to a certain extent functionally independent of its genetic blueprint and of the objective environment. A person can make himself happy or miserable regardless of what is actually happened outside just by changing the contents of consciousness. We all know individuals who can transform hopeless situations into challenges to be overcome just through the force of their personalities. This ability to persevere despite obstacles and setbacks is the quality people most admire in others, and justly so. It is probably the most important trait, not only for succeeding in life, but for enjoying it as well. To develop this trait, one must find ways to order consciousness so as to be in control of feelings and thoughts. It is best not to expect that shortcuts will do the trick. Some people have the tendency to become very mystical when talking about consciousness and expect it to accomplish miracles that at present it is not designed to perform. They would like to believe that anything is possible in what they think of as the spiritual realm. Other individuals claim the power to channel into past existences, to communicate with spiritual entities, and to perform uncanny feats of extrasensory perception. When not outright frauds, these accounts usually turn out to be self-delusions, lies that an overly perceptive mind tells itself. That's a very interesting theory. I don't agree with them, though. Anyways, that's just my side note. The remarkable accomplishments of Hindu fakirs and other practitioners of mental disciplines are often presented as examples of the unlimited powers of the mind and with more jurisdiction. But even many of these claims do not hold up under investigation. And the ones that do can be explained in terms of the extremely specialized training of a normal mind. After all, mystical explanations are not necessary to account for the performance of a great violinist or a great athlete, even though most of us could not even begin to approach their powers. The yogi, similarly, is a virtuoso of the control of consciousness. Like all virtuosi, he must spend many years learning, and he must keep constantly in training. Being a specialist, he cannot afford the time or the mental energy to do anything other than fine-tune his skill at manipulating inner experiences. The skills the yogi gains are at the expense of the more mundane abilities that other people learn to develop and take for granted. What an individual yogi can do is amazing, but so is what a plumber can do or a good mechanic. Perhaps in time we shall discover. Oh, that's kind of interesting how he um, have the yogi, the status of a yogi almost equivalent to the status of a plumber. I guess, well, if you're a really good plumber or a really good mechanic, I guess that would be in a way equivalent to a good yogi. I don't know. It's a very interesting analogy. Uh, Anyways, perhaps in time we shall discover hidden powers of the mind that will allow it to make the sort of quantum leaps that now we can only dream about. There is no reason to rule out the possibility that eventually we shall be able to bend spoons with brain waves. But at this point, when there are so many more mundane but no less urgent tasks to accomplish, it seems a waste of time to lust for powers beyond our reach, when consciousness, with all its limitations, could be employed so much more effectively. Although in its present state it cannot do what some people wish it to do, the mind has enormous untapped potential that we desperately need to learn how to use. Because no branch of science deals with consciousness directly, there is no single accepted description of how it works. I don't know if I agree with that. There's a lot of studies of how consciousness works, and I think in a way consciousness is very connected to spirituality, which I think this author doesn't really address, which is a big part, I think, of consciousness. That's just my opinion. Many disciplines touch on it and thus provide peripheral accounts: neuroscience, neuroanatomy, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, psychoanalysis, and phenomenology are some of the most direct relevant fields to choose from. However, trying to summarize their findings would result in an account similar to the descriptions the blind men gave of the elephant, each different and each unrelated to the others. No doubt we shall continue to learn important things about consciousness from these disciplines, but in the meantime, we are left with the task of providing a model that is grounded in fact, yet expressed simply enough so that anyone can make use of it. Although it sounds like indecipherable academic jargon, the most concise description of the approach I believe to be the clearest way to examine the main facets of what happens in the mind in a way that can be useful in the actual practice of everyday life is a phenomenological model of consciousness based on information theory. This representation of consciousness is phenomenological in that it deals directly with events, phenomena, as we experience and interpret them, rather than focusing on the anatom, sorry, anatona, anatom, anatom, oh boy, anatomical, okay, got it, anatomical structures. Got a little brain twister there. Neurochemical processes or unconscious purposes that make these events possible. Of course, it is understood that whatever happens in the mind is the result of electrochemical changes in the central nervous system, as laid down over millions of years by biological evolution. But phenomenology assumes that a mental event can be best understood if we look at it directly as it was experienced, rather than through the specialized optics of a particular discipline. Yet, in contrast to pure phenomenology, which intentionally excludes any other theory or science from its method, the model we will explore here adopts principles from information theory as being relevant for understanding what happens in consciousness. These principles include knowledge about how sensory data are processed, stored, and used, the dynamics of attention and memory. Okay, so there's a footnote in the back here, about phenomenology. The term phenomenological is not used here to denote adherence to the tenets or methods of any particular thinker or school. It only means that the approach to the problem of studying experience is heavily influenced by the insights of Husserl, 1962, Heidegger, 1962, 1967, Sartre, 1958, Merleau-Ponty, 1962, 1964, and some of their translators into the social sciences, e.g. Nathanson, 1963, Gendlin, 1962, Fischer, 1969, Wan, 1964, and Schutz, 1962. Clear, short introductions to the phenomenology of Husserl are the books by Kohak, 1978, and Kolakowski, 1987. To follow this volume, however, there is no need to keep in mind any phenomenological assumption. The argument must stand on its own merits and be understood on its own terms. The same is true for information theory. See Wiener, 1948, 1961. Okay. With this framework in mind, what then does it mean to be conscious? It simply means that certain specific conscious events, sensations, feelings, thoughts, intentions are occurring, and that we are able to direct the course. In contrast, when we are dreaming, some of the same events are present, yet we are not conscious because we cannot control them. I don't know about that. We can control dreams. Lucid dreaming, they call it. So I don't know if his theory is sound. Anyways, for instance, I may dream of having received news of a relative's being involved in an accident, and I may feel very upset. I might think I wish I could be of help. Despite the fact that I perceive, feel, think, and form intentions in the dream, I cannot act on these processes by making provisions for checking out the truthfulness of the news, for example. And hence I am not conscious. In dreams, we are locked into a single scenario we cannot change at all. The events that constitute consciousness, the things we see, feel, think, and desire, are information that we can manipulate and use. Thus, we might think of consciousness as intentionally ordered information. This dry definition, accurate as it is, does not fully suggest the importance of what it conveys. Since for us, outside events do not exist unless we are aware of them, consciousness responds to subjectivity, experience, reality. While everything we feel, hear, smell, or remember is potentially a candidate for entering consciousness, the experiences that actually do become part of it are much fewer than those left out. Thus, while consciousness is a mirror that reflects what our senses tell us, what happens both outside our bodies and within the nervous system, it reflects those changes selectively, actively shaping events, imposing on them a reality of its own. The reflection consciousness provides is what we call our life, the sum of all we have heard, seen, felt, hoped, and suffered from birth to death. Although we believe that there are things outside consciousness, we have direct evidence only of those that find a place in it. I think I missed the dreaming part. There is a footnote about that. So let's read that. Oh, dreaming. Okay, right here. Dreaming, Stewart, 1972, reports that the Sonoy of Malaysia learned to control their dreams and thereby achieve unusual mastery over waking consciousness as well. If this is true, which seems doubtful, it is an interesting exception that goes toward proving the general rule. In other words, it means that by training attention, one can control consciousness even in sleep. Mr. C, 1982a. One recent conscious, I just talked about that, lucid dreaming. One recent consciousness expansion method has been trying to do just this. Lucid dreaming is an attempt to control thought processes in sleep. LaBerge, 1985. Okay. As the central clearinghouse in which varied events processed by different senses can be represented and compared, consciousness can contain a famine in Africa, the smell of a rose, the performance of the Dow Jones, and a plan to stop at the store to buy some bread all at the same time. But that does not mean that its content is a shapeless jumble. We may call intentions the force that keeps information in consciousness ordered. Intentions arise in consciousness whenever a person is aware of desiring something or wanting to accomplish something. Intentions are also bits of information, shaped either by biological needs or by internalized social goals. They act as magnetic fields, moving attention towards some objects away from others, keeping our mind focused on some stimuli in preference to others. We often call the manifestation of intentionality by other names, such as instinct, need, drive, or desire. But these are all explanatory terms telling us why people behave in certain ways. Intention is a more neutral and descriptive term. It doesn't say why a person wants to do a certain thing, it simply states that he does. For instance, whenever blood sugar level drops below a critical point, we start feeling uneasy. We might feel irritable and sweaty and get stomach cramps. Because of genetically programmed instructions to restore the level of sugar in the blood, we might start thinking about food. We will look for food until we eat and are no longer hungry. In this instance, we could say that it was the hunger drive that organized the content of consciousness, forcing us to focus attention on food. But this is already an interpretation of the facts, no doubt chemically accurate, but phenomenologically irrelevant. The hungry person is not aware of the level of sugar in his bloodstream. He knows only that there is a bit of information in his consciousness that he has learned to identify as hunger. Once the person is aware that he is hungry, he might very well form the intention of obtaining some food. If he does so, his behavior will be the same as if he were simply obeying a need or drive. But alternatively, he could disregard the pangs of hunger entirely. He might have some stronger and opposite intentions, such as losing weight or wanting to save money or fasting for religious reasons. Sometimes, as in the case of political protesters who wish to starve themselves to death, the intention of making an ideological statement might override genetic instructions, resulting in voluntary death. The intentions we either inherit or acquire are organized in hierarchies of goals, which specify the order of precedence among them. For the protesters, achieving a given political reform may be more important than anything else, life included. That one goal takes precedence over all others. Most people, however, adopt sensible goals based on the needs of their body: to live a long and healthy life, to have sex, to be well fed and comfortable, or on the desires implanted by the social system: to be good, to work hard, to spend as much as possible, to live up to others' expectations. But there are enough exceptions in every culture to show that goals are quite flexible. Individuals who depart from the norms, heroes, saints, sages, artists, and poets, as well as madmen or criminals, look for different things in life than most others do. The existence of people like these shows that consciousness can be ordered in terms of different goals and intentions. Each of us has this freedom to control our subjective reality. The limits of consciousness. And there's a footnote about that, so let's read that first. Okay. Limits of consciousness. The first general statement about the number of bits that can be processed simultaneously was by Miller, 1958. Orme, 1969. On the basis of von Uxko's 1957 calculations, has figured that 1/18th of a second is the threshold of discrimination. Wow. How did he come up with that? Curious mind wants to know. Anyways, cognitive scientists who have treated the limitations of attention include Simon, 1969, 1978, Kahneman, 1973, Hasher and Zaks, 1979, Isenk, sorry, butchering names here, 1982, and Hoffman, Nelson, and Hook, 1983. Attentional demands made by cognitive processes are discussed by Nesser, 1967, 1976, Tressman and Galady, 1980, and Tressman and Schmidt, 1982. The attentional requirements of storing and recalling information from memory have been dealt with by Atkinson and Schifrin, 1968, and Hasher and Zaks, 1979. But the importance of attention and its limitation was already well known to William James, 1890. Okay. All right. Limits of consciousness. If it were possible to expand indefinitely what consciousness is able to encompass, one of the most fundamental dreams of humankind would come true. It would be almost as good as being immortal or omnipotent. In short, godlike. We could think of everything, feel everything, do everything, scan through so much information that we could fill up every fraction of a second with a rich tapestry of experiences. It is the space of a lifetime. We could go through a million. In the space of a lifetime, we could go through a million, or why not through an infinite number of lives? Unfortunately, the nervous system has definite limits on how much information it can process at any given time. There are just so many events that can appear in consciousness and be recognized and handled appropriately before they begin to crowd each other out. Walking across a room while chewing gum at the same time is not difficult, even though some statesmen have been alleged to be unable to do so, or to do it. But in fact, there is not that much more that can be done concurrently. Thoughts have to follow each other, and they get jumbled. While we are thinking about a problem, we cannot truly experience either happiness or sadness. We cannot run, sing, and balance the checkbook simultaneously because each one of these activities exhausts most of our capacity for attention. At this point in our scientific knowledge, we are on the verge of being able to estimate how much information the central nervous system is capable of processing. It seems we can manage at most 7 bits of information, such as differentiated sounds or visual stimuli or recognizable nuances of emotion or thought at any one time, and that the shortest time it takes to discriminate between one set of bits and another is about 1/18th of a second. By using these figures, one concludes that it is possible to process at most 126 bits of information per second, or 7,560 per minute, or almost 500,000 per hour. Over a lifetime of 70 years and counting 16 hours of waking time each day, this amounts to about 185 billion bits of information. It is out of this total that everything in our life must come, every thought, memory, feeling, or action. It seems like a huge amount, but in reality, it does not go that far. The limitation of consciousness is demonstrated by the fact that to understand what another person is saying, we must process 40 bits of information each second. If we assume the upper limit of our capacity to be 126 bits per second, it follows that to understand what three people are saying simultaneously is theoretically possible, but only by managing to keep out of consciousness every other thought or sensation. We couldn't, for instance, be aware of the speaker's expressions, nor could we wonder about why they're saying what they're saying or notice what they are wearing. Of course, these figures are only suggestive at this point in our knowledge of the way our mind works. It could be argued justifiably that they either underestimate or overestimate the capacity of the mind to process information. The optimists claim that through the course of evolution, the nervous system has become adept at chunking bits of information so that processing capacity is constantly expanded. Simple functions like adding a column of numbers or driving a car grow to be automated, leaving the mind free to deal with more data. We also learn how to compress and streamline information through symbolic means, language, math, abstract concepts, and stylized narratives. Each biblical parable, for instance, tries to encode the hard-won experience of many individuals over unknown eons of time. Consciousness, the optimists argue, is an open system. In effect, it is infinitely expandable, and there is no need to take its limitations into account. There's a footnote on the processing capacity. Okay. Okay, so it talks about limiting processing speech. For the 40-bit per second requirement, see Lieberman, Mattingly, and Turvey, 1972, and Nussbaum and Schwab, 1968. Okay. Okay. There's also uses of time that we read. The uses of time, the most comprehensive, the first comprehensive tabulation of how people spend their time was the cross-national project reported in Zalai, 1965. The figures reported here are based on my studies with the experience sampling method, ESM, e.g. Mr. C, Larson, and Prescott, 1977, Mr. C and Graf, 1980, Mr. C and Larson, 1984, and Mr. C and Mr. C, 1988. Okay. Okay. But the ability to compress stimuli does not help as much as one might expect. The requirements of life still dictate that we spend about 8% of waking time eating, and almost the same amount taking care of personal bodily needs, such as washing, dressing, shaving, and going to the bathroom. These two activities alone take up 15% of consciousness. And while engaged in them, we can't do much else that requires serious concentration. And even when there is nothing else, pressing, occupying their minds, most people fall far below the peak capacity for processing information. In the roughly 1/3 of the day that is free of obligations, in their precious leisure time, Most people, in fact, seem to use their minds as little as possible. The largest part of free time, almost half of it for American adults, is spent in front of the television set. The plots and characters of the popular shows are so repetitive that although watching TV requires the processing of visual images, very little else in the way of memory, thinking, or volition is required. Not surprisingly, people report some of the lowest levels of concentration, use of skills, clarity of thought, and feelings of potency when watching television. The other leisure activities people usually do at home are only a little more demanding. Reading most newspapers and magazines, talking to other people, and gazing out the window also involve processing very little new information and thus require little concentration. So, the 185 billion events to be enjoyed over our mortal days might be either an overestimate or an underestimate. If we consider the amount of data the brain could theoretically process, the number might be too low. But if we look at how people actually use their minds, it is definitely much too high. In any case, an individual can experience only so much. Therefore, the information we allow into consciousness becomes extremely important. It is, in fact, what determines the content of and the quality of life. And there's a footnote about watching TV. We read about the time aspect. So let's read about the TV part. Television watching. The feelings people report while watching television are compared to experiences in other activities in ESM studies by Mr. C, Larson, and Prescott. Excuse me. 1977, Mr. C and Kuby, 1981, Larson and Kuby, 1983, and Kuby and Mr. C in press. So let's read psychic energy. That's the other new section. So the psychic energy, the processes take place in consciousness. Thoughts, emotions, will, and memory have been described by philosophers since the earliest times, and by some of the earliest psychologists, e.g. Ock, 1905. For a review, see Hilgard, 1980. Energistic approaches to consciousness include want, 1902, Lips, 1899, Ribot, 1890, Binet, 1890, and Jung, 1928, 1960. Some contemporary approaches are represented by Kahneman, 1973, Mr. C, 1978, 1987, and Hoffman, Nelson, and Hook, 1983. Okay. Attention as psychic energy. Information enters consciousness either because we intend to focus attention on it or as a result of attentional habits based on biological or social instructions. For instance, driving down the highway, we pass hundreds of cars without actually being aware of them. Their shape and color might register for a fraction of a second, and then they're immediately forgotten. But occasionally we notice a particular vehicle, perhaps because it is swerving unsteadily between lanes, or because it is moving very slowly, or because of its unusual appearance. The image of the unusual car enters, oops, sorry, I'll put in the camera so you guys can read it. The image of the unusual car enters the focus of consciousness, and we become aware of it. In the mind, the visual information about the car, e.g., it is swerving, gets related to information about other errant cars stored in memory. To determine into which category the present instant fits, is this an inexperienced driver, a drunken driver, a momentarily distracted but competent driver? As soon as the event is matched to an already known class of events, it is identified. Now it must be evaluated. Is this something to worry about? If the answer is yes, then we must decide on an appropriate course of action. Should we speed up, slow down, change lanes, stop and alert the highway patrol? All these complex mental operations must be completed in a few seconds, sometimes in a fraction of a second. While forming such a judgment seems to be a lightning-fast reaction, it does take place in real time, and it does not happen automatically. There is a distinct process that makes such reactions possible, a process called attention. It is attention that selects the relevant bits of information from the potential millions of bits available. It takes attention to retrieve the appropriate references from memory, to evaluate the event, and then to choose the right thing to do. I think what the author calls attention is what the Buddhist calls mindfulness. Sounds like the same thing, just different words. Despite its great powers, attention cannot step beyond the limits already described. It cannot notice or hold in focus more information that can be processed simultaneously. Retrieving information from memory storage and bringing it into the focus of awareness, comparing information, evaluating, deciding, all make demands on the mind's limited processing capacity. For example, the driver who noticed this swerving car will have to stop talking on his cellular phone if he wants to avoid an accident. Some people learn to use this priceless resource efficiently, while others waste it. The mark of a person who is in control of consciousness is the ability to focus attention at will, to be oblivious to distractions, to concentrate for as long as it takes to achieve a goal, and not longer. And the person who can do this usually enjoys the normal course of everyday life. Two very different individuals come to mind to illustrate how attention can be used to order consciousness in the service of one's goals. The first is E, a European woman who is one of the best known and powerful women in her country. A scholar of international reputation, she has at the same time built up a thriving business that employs hundreds of people and has been on the cutting edge of its field for a generation. E travels constantly to political, business, and professional meetings, moving among her several residences around the world. If there is a concert in the town where she's staying, E will probably be in the audience. And the first free moment she will be at the museum or library. And while she is in the meeting, her chauffeur, instead of just standing around and waiting, will be expected to visit the local art gallery or museum. For on the way home, his employer will want to discuss what he thought of its paintings. Not 1 minute of E's life is wasted. Usually she is writing, solving problems, reading one of the 5 newspapers or the earmarked sections of books on her daily schedule, or just asking questions, watching curiously what is going on, and planning her next task. Very little of her time is spent on the routine functions of life. Chatting or socializing out of mere politeness is done graciously, but avoided whenever possible. Each day, however, she devotes some time to recharging her mind by such simple means as standing still for 15 minutes on the lakeshore, facing the sun with eyes closed. Or she may take her hounds for a walk in the meadows on the hill outside town. E is so much in control of her attentional processes that she can disconnect her consciousness at will and fall asleep for a refreshing nap whenever she has a moment free. E's life has not been easy. Her family became impoverished after World War I, and she herself lost everything, including her freedom, during World War II. Several decades ago, she had a chronic disease her doctors were sure was fatal. But she recovered everything, including her health, by disciplining her attention and refusing to diffuse it on unproductive thoughts or activities. At this point, she radiates a pure glow of energy. And despite past hardships and the intensity of her present life, she seems to relish thoroughly every minute of it. The second person who comes to mind is in many ways the opposite of E, the only similarity being the same unbending sharpness of attention. R is a slight, at first sight, unprepossessing man. Shy, modest to the point of self-effacement, he would be easy to forget immediately after a short meeting. Although he is known to only a few, his reputation among them is very great. He is master of an arcane branch of scholarship, and at the same time, the author of exquisite verse translated into many languages. Every time one speaks to him, the image of a deep well full of energy comes to mind. As he talks, his eyes take in everything. Every sentence he hears is analyzed 3 or 4 different ways, even before the speaker has finished saying it. Things that most people take for granted puzzled him, and until he figures them out in an original yet perfectly appropriate way, he will not let them be. Yet, despite this constant effort of focused intelligence, R gives the impression of restfulness, of calm serenity. He always seems aware of the tiniest ripples of activity in his surroundings, but R does not notice things in order to change them or judge them. He is content to register reality, to understand, and then perhaps to express his understanding. R is not going to make the immediate impact on society that E has, but his consciousness is just as ordered and complex. His attention is stretched as far as it can go, interacting with the world around him. And like E, he seems to enjoy his life intensely. Each person allocates his or her limited attention either by focusing it intentionally like a beam of energy, as do E and R in the previous examples, or by diffusing it in desultory random movements. The shape of and content of life depend on how attention has been used. Entirely different realities will emerge depending on how it is vested. The names we use to describe personality traits such as extrovert, high achiever, or paranoid refer to the specific patterns people have used to structure their attention. At the same party, the extrovert will seek out and enjoy interactions with others, and high achiever will look for useful business contacts, and the paranoid will be on guard for signs of danger he must avoid. Attention can be vested in innumerable ways, ways that can make life either rich or miserable. And there's a footnote about attention. Let's see here. Attention and culture. The Melanesians' ability to remember precise locations by floating on the surface of the sea is described by Gladwin, 1970. Reference to the many names for snow used by Eskimos can be found in Burguignon, 1979. The flexibility of attentional structures is even more obvious when they are compared across cultures or occupational classes. Eskimo hunters are trained to discriminate between dozens of types of snow. Oh, we read the footnote before we read the paragraph. Okay, that's all right. And are always aware of the direction and speed of the wind. Traditional Melanesian sailors can be taken blindfolded to any point of the ocean within a radius of several hundred miles from their island home, and if allowed to float for a few minutes in the sea, are able to recognize the spot by the feel of the currents on their body. A musician structures her attention so as to focus on nuances of sound that ordinary people are not aware of. A stockbroker focuses on tiny changes in the market that others do not register. A good clinical diagnostician has the uncanny eye for symptoms because they have trained their attention to process signals that otherwise would pass unnoticed. Because attention determines what will or will not appear in consciousness, and because it is also required to make any other mental events, such as remembering, thinking, feeling, and making decisions happen here, it is useful to think of it as a psychic energy. Attention is like energy in that without it, no work can be done. And in doing work, it is dissipated. We create ourselves by how we invest this energy. Memories, thoughts, and feelings are all shaped by how we use it. And it is an energy under our control. to do with as we please. Hence, attention is our most important tool in the task of improving the quality of experience. Okay, we will stop here for now, and we'll continue next week in chapter 2, part 2. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that, and we will see you next week. I hope you guys all have a good week. Bye-bye now.